know what week we are here at Tennessee Tech. We're well into October. It's October 19th, and we're going to be looking at an intersection between Buddhism, Christianity, and the beat writers today in American literature. And of course, the most important writer to talk about that intersection is Jack Kerouac, not only because of his prominence in the beat movement, but because he himself, raised Catholic, always had a strong attraction to Jesus Christ and an interest in Catholic Christianity, as he incorporated his Buddhism into his life work. And so one can practice Buddhism and Christianity simultaneously. Well, at least one can suggest that that's possible for a few different reasons. But one of the main reasons why theologians anyway, and religious studies scholars concede that this might be possible is because Buddhism is not a theology in the same way that Christianity is. The Buddha, who lived before, was believed to be a historical figure who lived before Jesus, was not considered to be the incarnation of God, the third person of the Trinity, things like that. And so Buddhist practice also seems to be around a doing or a not doing of certain things, as opposed to a full-blown theology. Now, like many of you, I have much more experience in Christianity than I do in Buddhism. So I'm a dabbler in Buddhism, and I'm by no means consider myself to be an expert in Buddhism. But I've learned a little bit about it through my encounter with the beat writers. And I hope that you'll learn a little bit more about Buddhism, at least in a beat way today. And then, like me, many of you are much more familiar with Christianity, and we'll see how that intersects with Buddhism today. And you might also be familiar with other spiritual traditions, or you might be what the scholars today say are the nuns. You might be considered yourself to be an N-O-N-E, a nun, which is supposed to be the most widely growing religious group of our time, of your time. So the Dharma Bums, which we looked at an excerpt of earlier on the Kerouac Week in the Beat Reader just a few weeks ago, was considered to be one of the texts that really started to introduce the popularized version of Buddhism that Kerouac practiced to a wider audience. And there's two other figures that we'll be introducing today out of the Portable Beat Reader, Gary Snyder and Alan Watts, who are also responsible to introducing a kind of a lay Western audience, a non-religiously trained Western audience, to some of the ideas related to the Eastern practice of Buddhism, which comes from India and China and Japan and places like that. And there's this quote, this great quote from the reading that you all did back on the Dharma Bums. A great rucksack revolution, thousands or even millions of young Americans wandering around with rucksacks, going up to mountains to pray, making children laugh and old men glad, making young girls happy and old girls happier. All of them Zen lunatics who go about writing poems that happen to appear in their heads for no reason, and also by being kind, and also by strange, unexpected acts, keep giving visions of eternal freedom to everybody and to all living creatures. Jack Kerouac, later in his career, published a book called The Scripture of the Golden Eternity, and was literally his attempt to write a sacred Buddhist text. It actually is fairly contemporary to his other works. The copyright in my imprint of this version said it was first actually written in '60, so it's actually contemporaneous to all of his other writings. Once Kerouac became popular, his publishers were asking him to just crank out stuff, and because he believed in spontaneous prose, as we've learned, and wrote very quickly, and wrote much in the best thought ideas that he espoused, he could crank a book out fairly quickly. The introduction to my version of the Scripture of the Golden Eternity says, according to Jack Kerouac, Gary Snyder, and we'll be learning a lot more about Gary Snyder today, as I've already stated, Gary Snyder said to him at one point, in the midst of their energetic comradeship, certainly sensing Jack's grasp of dharmic matters, all right, Kerouac, it's about time for you to write sutra. Traditionally, the word sutra comes from the Sanskrit root siv, meaning to sew a thread or yarn. It also carries the implication of meeting point or junction, referring to the interstice of Buddha's enlightenment with the student's understanding. A sutra is historically a dialogue between Gautama, that would be Buddha, and one or more of his disciples, and carries the orally delivered exact words of the Buddha. Scripture, on the other hand, suggests the Christian canon, the Holy Scriptures or sacred writings of the Bible. Kerouac had a knowledge and appreciation of both. And so we don't, as we study other religions, have to grapple with this idea that other religions don't think of themselves as religions even. Taoism, Buddhism, Hinduism might not even consider themselves to be religions in the sense that Christianity in a sense defines religion for our Western way of life, and it defines religion in contrast to all others. So Judaism, Islam, the big three, if you will, with Christianity, and then the Eastern traditions like Taoism and Hinduism and Buddhism, and then you have, eclectic neo-paganism and all the new religious movements that were kind of invented religions. Of course, in the United States, we have, the Latter-day Saints, and we have the Jehovah's Witnesses, which have sort of spun from Christianity. And then you have, the made-up religions. As a matter of fact, in utopias and dystopias that we'll be looking at later in the semester, you actually even have a tradition of made-up religions. And so for Kerouac, we have an interfaith, or even better termed an interspiritual practitioner of Buddhism with a Christian root in his life, practicing this by writing his own Bible, if you will, his own scripture, his own canon. And I'll read you just an excerpt from this text, The Scripture of the Golden Eternity, by Jack Kerouac. Did I create that sky? Yes, for if it was anything other than a conception in my mind, I wouldn't have said sky. That is why I am the golden eternity. There are not two of us here, reader and writer, but one golden eternity, one which it is, that which everything is. The awakened Buddha to show the way, the chosen Messiah to die in the degradation of sentience, is the golden eternity. One is what is, the golden eternity, or God, or Tathagata, the named one, the human God, sentient godhood, animate divine, the deified one, verified one, the free one, the liberator, the still one, the settled one, the established one, golden eternity, all is well, the empty one, the ready one, the quitter, the sitter, the justified one, the happy one. That sky, if it was anything other than an illusion of my mortal mind, I would have said that sky. Thus I made that sky. I am the golden eternity. I am mortal golden eternity. I was awakened to show the way, chosen to die in the degradation of life, because I am mortal golden eternity. I am the golden eternity in mortal animate form. Strictly speaking, there is no me, because all is emptiness. I am empty. I am non-existent. All is bliss. This truth law has no more reality than the world. You are the golden eternity, because there is no me and no you, only one golden eternity. The realizer, entertain no imaginations whatever, for the thing is a no thing. The thing is a no thing. Knowing this, then, is human godhood. This world is the movie of what everything is one movie made of the same stuff throughout, belonging to nobody, which is what everything is. If we were not all the golden eternity, we wouldn't be here. Because we are here, we can't help being pure. To tell man to be pure on account of the punishing angel that punishes the bad and the rewarding angel that rewards the good would be like telling the water, be wet. Nevertheless, all things depend on supreme reality, which is already established as the record of karma earned fate. God is not outside us, but is just us, the living and the dead, the never lived and never died. That we should learn it only now is supreme reality. It was written a long time ago in the archives of universal mind. It is already done. There's no more to do. It is already done. There is no more to do. It's already done. There is no more to do. You are the golden eternity because there is no me and no you, only one golden eternity. I am empty. I am non-existent. All is bliss. Jack Kerouac. I just reread a couple of my more favorite lines from that. The Scripture of the Golden Eternity by Jack Kerouac. There's also the Eightfold Path. I'm not even going to get into this. I'm just going to teach this Four Noble Truths. And I'm not really teaching this as I am looking at it with you, because I am not an expert in Buddhism. I think I am a bit of a practitioner of interfaith and interspiritual, and so I have some wisdom and experience there. But this is one of those areas. I've taken, I've been academically trained in religious studies, but this is one of those areas where one has to go out and explore on their own. And I'm only doing this lecture today to really encourage you all to see this as a fundamental part of American studies. American studies is the study of America. America is our topic for this class. What is America is the topic for this class. And the convergence of multiple religious traditions is a huge American theme, and it definitely factors into our literary heritage. The truth of suffering, the truth of the cause of suffering, the truth of the end of suffering, and the truth of the path that frees us from suffering. And I think that one aspect where you might find an intersection between Christianity and Buddhism is this idea that life itself is tragic, that there is death, that death is real, and that there's a mortality to wrestle with, that we wrestle with weakness and pain, and that in Jesus, suffering is a key to who he was and what the Christian tradition believes in relates to a great act of suffering on the cross. The suffering in Buddhism might also be related to the Christian doctrine of original sin, that we live inside of the fall. And so Buddhism is a practice that alleviates suffering through discipline, and then maybe ultimately leaving sort of the mortal plane, achieving nirvana and all this, kind of stuff, is achieved through understanding of the nature of humanity that includes suffering. And we live in a very pharmacological and technological world, and where drugs and technology and television and reality TV and Netflix and, ibuprofen and heroin and sex and, alcohol, all of these things, are sometimes can be used as narcotic numbing agents to sort of help us get out of that part of life, which is tragic, and accepting and realizing that pain and confusion and such are a part of life. And I think it is definitely an irony that doesn't at least bypass me to see that the 60s and the hippies and the counterculture and the Buddhist teachers all of that time, suffered with addiction. Alan Watts, who I'm introducing to you all in this lecture today as well, also very much struggled with alcohol use, much like Kerouac did. And so facing up to this suffering, even talking about the reality of the suffering, is not the same as learning to live with it without some form of, therapeutic self-care, self-medication being one of the ways that people dealt with it. And well, here is Alan Watts, and he's in our Beat Reader. You can find him on page 606 in the back of the Beat Reader. And do we even allow him to be in American literature? He was born in the United Kingdom in January of 1915. He did die in California. I don't know if he ever became a U.S. citizen, but he did a lot of his work in the United States. But he's very popular on YouTube. There's a lot of Alan Watts videos on YouTube. Many of them blend a kind of ambient techno music with him speaking on these various topics, and his accent, his British accent, sort of like, I don't know, it just kind of lends this sort of, you know, wisdom element to it. I don't know what it was. Maybe you, like me, when you were younger, listened to a lot of audiobooks, and maybe it was a, you know, a J.R. Tolkien or a J.K. Rowling or a C.S. Lewis book, and for some reason the narrator having a British accent somehow lends and elevates the experience for the listener. Maybe that's just me. Maybe you've never had that experience. And so I'm going to look at this essay he wrote on page 607 with you all for a moment. If you have it with you, your textbook on 607, called Beat Zen, Square Zen, and Zen. Watts writes, the point is simply that people who feel a profound need to justify themselves have difficulty in understanding the viewpoints of those who do not. And the Chinese who created Zen were the same kind of people as Lao Tzu, who centuries before had said, those who justify themselves do not convince. Further down on that page, to Confucius, it seemed much better to be human-hearted than righteous. And to the great Taoists, Lao Tzu and Chung Tzu, it was obvious that one could not be right without also being wrong, because the two were inseparable as back and front. As Chung Tzu said, those who would have a good government without its corrective misrule and right without its correlative wrong do not understand the principles of the universe. Maybe you've seen a yin-yang symbol. That's that circle with the black and white polarities in it. That is being spoken to there with the Tao. At the bottom of that same page, he writes, a universal vision of life as the Tao, or way of nature in which the good and the evil, the creative and the destructive, the wise and the foolish are the inseparable polarities of existence. Tao is that from which one cannot depart. That from which one can depart is not the Tao. He contrasts this with those of us, he says, and like you and like me for sure, he says on the top of page 608, who were brought up with, quote, the chronic uneasy conscience of the Hebrew Christian cultures. In the middle and toward the bottom of 608, he quotes Lin Chi, in Buddhism, there's no place for using effort, just to be ordinary and nothing special. Eat your food. Move your bowels, pass water, and when you're tired, go and lay down. The ignorant will laugh at me, but the wise will understand. And so he says here basically that life is to be the living. And there's another Buddhist type saying, chop wood, carry water. It's like, do your chores. Sleep when you're tired, eat when you're hungry, get up in the morning, go to bed in the evening, go about your daily life, and just be a human being, not a human doing, if you will. And he contrasts that right away on the bottom of 608 with what he calls self-defensive bohemianism. Self-defensive bohemianism. Always in the background, there's our vague disquiet with the artificiality and the anti-naturalness of both Christianity with its politically ordered cosmology and technology with its imperialistic mechanization of the natural world from which man himself feels strangely alien. And on top of page 609, I'm reading that. And so he seems to be contrasting Zen with a Western understanding. And he wants to impart us in the bottom of page 609 with a wholeness. He calls it a profoundly refreshing sense of wholeness to a culture in which the spiritual and the material, the conscious and the unconscious have been cataclysmically split. And so what he's accusing those of us with the Western mind is to getting into an either or duality, a binary, an us versus them mentality. Clearly, in the political dynamic of our world today, here, reading to my class here on October 2020, just a few days before a federal election that only comes every 4 years, you can see the polarity, at least in the political schematic of America today. On the bottom of 609, he writes, the Buddha, or the awakened man of Chinese Zen, is ordinary, nothing special. He's humorously human, like Zen tramps portrayed by Mun Chi and Ling Chi. And then into the next page, he contrasts The Westerner who's attracted to Zen is having already come to terms with, quote, the Lord God Jehovah and with his Hebrew Christian conscience so that he can take it or leave it without fear or rebellion. He must be free of the itch to justify himself. This keeps coming up in the Watts text, and probably for somebody who is talking so much about not justifying himself, probably has struggled with the need to justify himself. He must be free of the itch, he says. His Zen will either be beat or square, either revolt from the culture or the social order, or a new form of stuffiness and respectability. Now, of course, the square, according to the beatnik, is the conformist. And in a sense, Watts seems to be saying that religion is another form of being a square, whether it's Christianity or Zen, and that the Beats and the Bohemians are kind of anti-religious in a sense, or are they? He says here on the middle of 610, for Zen is above all the liberation of the mind from conventional thought. And this is something utterly different from rebellion against convention on the one hand, or adopting foreign conventions on the other. And so liberation from convention is not the same as rebelling against convention. And one can at least intuit that maybe Watts here is giving a correction to the Bohemians and saying, you're not really getting free, man. You're just rebelling against other people's versions of freedom, right? So rebelling and reacting against what you don't like about society might not be the same as creating the new society. And he says on the top of 611, the beat mentality, as I'm thinking of it, is something much more extensive and vague than the hipster life of New York and San Francisco. It is the younger generation's non-participation in the American life, a revolt which does not seek to change the existing order, but simply turns away from it to find significance of life in subjective experience rather than objective achievement. It contrasts with the square and other directed mentality of beguilement by social convention, unaware of the core relativity of right and wrong, the mutual necessity of capitalism and communism to each other's existence, the inner identity of Puritanism and lechery, of, say, the alliance of church lobbies and the organized crime to maintain the laws against gambling. And so this idea to just go and dig the universe, according to Ginsberg and Kerouac, is a form of Zen that he's calling beat Zen, but he's not seeing it uncritically, but he's placing it in the context of young people who, for whatever reason, are alienated from what they thought of as the traditions of America. On page 612, he says there is an obvious difference between square Zen and the common or garden variety squareness of the Rotary Club or the Presbyterian Church. It is infinitely more imaginative, sensitive, and interesting, but it is still square because it is a quest for the right spiritual experience. And then he reminds us in the very next paragraph that William Blake said, the fool who persists in his folly will become wise. Now, Blake is the same English poet that inspired Ginsberg. And so he makes all of these claims and all of these, proposals, and then realizes that maybe this is all just a lot of, sort of self-reflective kind of gibberish, really, because at the end he says, that it's really nothing special, don't fuss about it. And then he says, but you're sure if you want to fuss about it, it's fine. He said, I want to say something to all the Zen fussers. I mean, it's obviously the British upbringing. He said, let's don't fuss about being Zen. And then he says, fuss is all right too. If you are hung up on Zen, then there's no need to try to pretend that you're not. Or if you want to spend your time hopping freight cars and digging Charlie Parker, go ahead, be free. But it definitely here, and the text is helpful, and you probably need to read it about 5 times till you even have most of you will have to read it a second time just to gather what Watts is saying there, is he's overlaying this Eastern tradition with this kind of Western rebellion. And this was all the rage at the time. But what you would find is, I think a lot of the quote hipsters would be able to sort of just kind of name drop some of this stuff without actually really understanding it. And so Kerouac, for all of his flaws, really tried to understand that. And so did Allen. And Allen, of course, had another 30 years on Earth after Kerouac passed away to work on this. Gary Snyder's a little bit different. Gary Snyder being one of the few beat legends that's still with us. But he learned about this stuff as a young man, and he was definitely somebody who tried to practice it as kind of a craftsman. And he also learned about anti-authoritarianism. He learned about anarchism, which is not the kind of stuff that you see on the news where they're, the kids, lighting fire to stuff in the streets. Now, that's a whole nother topic here. I'm not addressing that. This is a kind of spiritual anarchism, but it is connected to the U.S. Movements of the 50s that Ginsburg wrote about in Howell, coming out of socialism of the 20s and 30s, the teens, the 20s and 30s. So Snyder was a wilderness guy, an outdoorsman, kind of a hiker, who was very influenced by the kind of the Zen idea to just kind of observe nature. There's two excellent pieces towards the back of the Beat Reader from Snyder that are just kind of mind-blowing. One of them is a poem that really typifies the contrast between the square culture and the straight culture. It's I went into the Maverick bar, and this is good because this is like, cowboys and rednecks too. And see, the thing about it is that the kind of the Appalachian sort of there's a rebelliousness there too. I mean, as a matter of fact, in today's polarity, one edge is that the script has been flipped. The anti-establishment became the establishment, and so now the former establishment felt disenfranchised, and so that they're rebelling as their own kind of anti-establishment. But definitely the hippie and the redneck have a lot in common, and the cowboy, but they're different. And this poem on page 572 just typifies it perfectly. It's Gary Snyder's "I Went into the Maverick Bar." I went into the Maverick Bar in Farmington, New Mexico, and drank double shots of bourbon backed with beer. My long hair was tucked up under a cap. I'd left the earring in the car. Two cowboys did horseplay by the pool tables. A waitress asked us, "Where are you from?" A country and western band began to play "We Don't Smoke Marijuana in Muskogee." It's a great song. You got to go look it up yourselves, actually. And with the next song, a couple began to dance. They held each other like in high school dances in the 50s. I recalled when I worked in the woods and the bars of Madras, Oregon, the short-haired joy and roughness, America, your stupidity. I could almost love you again. We left onto the freeway shoulders, under the tough old stars, in the shadow of bluffs. I came back to myself, to the real work, to what is to be done? What is to be done? This work on page, that was on page 572. Work on page 569 by Gary Snyder is a prayer about Buddha. If Buddha was Smokey the Bear, and if Buddha was like Smokey the Bear in a park, who was going to go and talk to all the litter bugs that were messing up the parks. If you go hiking a lot, nothing on a beautiful Tennessee trail on a beautiful autumn day will mess with your mellow more than somebody having littered all over this trail. And if you're like me, you go hiking a lot, and sometimes you might actually even bring a litter grabber with you. And so Snyder writes this Buddhist prayer, this Buddhist scripture about Smokey the Bear. Bottom of 569, a handsome smoky-colored brown bear standing on his hind legs, showing that he is aroused and watchful, bearing in his right paw the shovel that digs to the truth beneath appearances, cuts the roots of useless attachments, and flings damp sand on the fires of greed and war. His left paw in the mudra of comradely display, indicating that all creatures have full right to live to their limits, and that the deer, the rabbits, chipmunks, snakes, dandelions, and lizards all grow in the realm of the Dharma on page 570. And so he goes to this great length to show the mystery of Smokey the Bear's unity with Mother Earth. And then he has this great incantation, really against the litter bugs and against the people, especially who throw cigarette butts on the ground on page 571. Thus his great mantra: I dedicate myself to the universal diamond, be this raging fury destroyed, and he will protect those who love woods and rivers, gods and animals, hobos and madmen, prisoners and sick people, musicians, playful women, hopeful children. And if anyone is threatened by advertising, air pollution, television, or the police, they should chant Smokey the Bear's war spell. Drown their butts, crush their butts, drown their butts, crush their butts. And Smokey the Bear will surely appear to put the enemy out with his Vajra shovel. A beautiful poem, and I strongly encourage you to read all of the selections by the great Gary Snyder. So there's a tangent. Maybe someone will go off on, like I had a student before who felt I neglected Gary Snyder in this syllabus. When we do the portable beat reader, he doesn't get the play that he deserves. But a great fellow traveler of Jack Kerouac's, and somebody who is an American Buddhist who really kind of made it his own, made the practice his own. Recent picture, somewhat recent picture of him on the left, a picture of him, excuse me, as a young man on the right. I'm going to switch gears and talk to you guys just for a couple of minutes about some fellow beat travelers that were actually Christians. Now, keeping in mind that in the textbook, Kerouac's probably, the most Jesus or oriented of the beats in the textbook. But there were a lot of what I would like to call beat adjacent people who were Christians. And years ago, reading these texts in this class, I had a student who basically said, well, I like what a lot of these people are saying. I like the kind of, freedom from attachment and materialism and the love of nature. So there was a lot of things that the student identified with, but she wasn't so into the drugs, sex, and rock and roll aspect. And she basically said to me in one of her blogs many years ago in this very class that you're taking today, she said basically, I wish they were into Jesus. And of course I knew this, but I hadn't really theorized it as a part of the beats. But the beat movement is very adjacent to the Catholic worker movement. And the Catholic worker movement, started by Dorothy Day and Peter Maurin in the 20s and 30s, and still going to this day, was a counterculture church movement. And Peter Maurin, the guy on the right, Dorothy Day, definitely the more famous of the two. Maurin said back in 1933, he said, the aim of the Catholic worker is to create order out of chaos. The aim of the Catholic worker is to help the unemployed to employ themselves. The aim of the Catholic worker is to make an impression on the depression through expression. The aim of the Catholic worker is to create a new society within the shell of the old, with the philosophy of the new, which is not a new philosophy, but a very old philosophy, a philosophy so old that it looks new. And what these folks did was they took parts of the Bible, like the Sermon on the Mount, and took it at its word. Matthew chapter 25 and other parts of the Bible that privilege the outcast and the oppressed and the poor and the pauper, the prisoner, the margins of society, and put them first. And they created houses of hospitality, and they built these beautiful farms, and they lived in community, and they lived in voluntary poverty. And they did this to this day. The Catholic worker is still a really active movement, very widely known movement, really beautiful kind of corrective, if you will, to other forms of prosperity and other of these kind of forms of Christianity. And it's definitely, life before death. Life after death is definitely something that the theology of Christianity looks at, but kind of a beat adjacent Christian would be interested in life before death. And I knew about the Catholic workers, but I had never really thought about them as being kind of part of the beat movement until I was challenged by a student. But there was one guy I discovered, because I just went on Google one day and I was like, where are all the beat, all the beatnik Christians? And this guy actually is known as a poet and had been in a Catholic order. He later left. Men in Catholic orders are celibate, women in Catholic orders are celibate, and he ended up falling in love later in life, and he wanted to get married, and so he left his Catholic order. He's also known as William Everson, but he also went by the name Brother Antoninus. But originally, they called him the Beat Friar. He would wear his monk robes and go and give poetry readings in coffee houses and such. And I just love Brother Antoninus, aka William Everson, and he wrote this beautiful poem, and you can see in this poem how, even though he's writing in a Christian kind of modality, how it really intersects with the beat. You can see the beatnik, and you don't have to make it up, right? It's very self-evident, the beatness in what he wrote. Let me read just an excerpt to you. He writes, "Dance, dance, dance on the cross of God, the cruciform of the rose, dance out the fierce exultancies, dance out the rivering apogee of time and its deceptions, dance in the heart's redemptive craze that seizes the shackles fallen worlds and annuls their prison. Not annul, but annuls, cancels. In the elemental pound of explicit hope, the world restores. Under the feet of 1,000 triumphs, the cross renews. In the life of the rose, the pulsant point of mystical intuition, God immolates himself, makes himself new. Form constellates being as the cone of creation, specified, meets the cone of the uncreated, specified. Dance out the truth of being in act and existence. Dance up the linear measurement of time to its quintessence. Beat it up into synthesis. Under the storm of your heels, pound to perfection. Make it be. Establish it in your movement. The perdurable moment that cannot die. Incarnate it. Divinize it in your fierce, unquenchable essence. Confer beatitude upon it, immortalize it in your glance, your look and your laughter. By the kiss of your lips, the ecstasy of your breath, created anew, recreated anew. O clear expression of beauty, O melody of existence, reality unfolded. Rose on the four wings of the cross, in the ecstasy of crucifixion, in the blood of being, in the single burn of beauty, be, so that in you, the consummate vision of other, in you I am. So clearly, Everson here, Brother Antoninus, is writing a kind of mystical Christianity, insofar as that when we see the cross, we see ourselves somehow kind of fused and molded, even with Jesus. Probably the most famous monk poet of the 20th century was Thomas Merton, and he lived just up the street in Kentucky. You could get to the Abbey of Gethsemane within a couple of hours from Cookeville. I've gone there many, many times on pilgrimage to sit with Merton. Of course, he's in the ground. I've had to go to where he's in the ground. But I love him here on the right, if you can see that. I'm not sure if you can see the full slide I've projected. But there he is in a trucker cap, and he's got a beer. And he's in his monk's robes, and he's out on a summer day, probably visiting with some friends, and having a beer in his trucker cap and his monk robes. But I'm going to read to you brief words from a poem by Thomas Merton called Advice to a Young Prophet. Keep away, son. These lakes are salt. These flowers eat insects. Here private lunatics yell and skip in a very dry country. Or where some haywire monument, some bad-faced daddy of fear commands an unintelligent right. To dance on the unlucky mountain, to dance they go, and shake the sin out of their feet and hands. Frenzied until the sudden night falls very quiet, and magic sin creeps secret back again. Badlands echo with omens of ruin. 7 are very satisfied regaining possession. Bring a little mescaline, you'll get along. There's something in your bones. There's someone dirty in your critical skin. There's a tradition in your cruel, misdirected finger, which you must obey and scribble on the hot sand. Let everybody come and attend where lights and airs are fixed, to teach and entertain. Oh, watch the sandy people hopping in the naked bullseye. Shake the wildness out of their limbs. Try to make peace like John in skins, Elijah in the timid air, or Anthony in tombs. Pluck the imaginary trigger, brothers. Shoot the devil, he'll be back again. America needs these fatal friends, oh God and country, to grovel in mystical ashes. Pretty big prophets whose words don't burn, fighting the strenuous imago all day long. Only these lunatics, oh happy chance, only these are sent. Only this anemic thunder grumbles on the salt flats in rainless nights. Oh, go home, brother, go home. The devil's back again, and magic hell is swallowing flies. Thomas Merton, Advice to a Young Prophet. And so clearly in these two poems that we've heard from Merton and Everson, and also the words of Peter Maurin about building the new world in the shell of the old, this is clearly a mystical Christianity where we walk, on dirty roads and we get dirt on our feet and we feel the pain of our sibling humans, our fellow humans. We feel their pain and their suffering. We unite with other humans. And so this is a mystery. We don't completely understand it. We participate in it, and poetry and art and dance. I think you saw the call to dance in two of these. When I was a little kid, they used to sing a song in church called "The Lord of the Dance," and it went something like this. I was to the tune of "Simple Gifts." I won't try to sing to you. I can't sing, but it said, he danced in the morning when the world was begun. He danced in the moon and the stars and the sun. He came down to heaven and he danced on the earth at Bethlehem. I had my birth. Dance, dance there, wherever you may be. I am the Lord of the dance, said he. I'll live in you if you live in me. I am the Lord of the dance, said he. And this kind of mystical dancing version of Christianity is kind of what I grew up in. We had two popular musical plays. The Godspell, where Jesus was dressed like a clown, Jesus Christ Superstar, where Jesus was kind of, a guitar, rock hippie, and the character in that, of course, in that musical, Judas Iscariot, factored very prominently in that. Godspell is still done in revival in churches to this day. Very faithful to the text, both of those musicals, but very much in the style of the hippie period. And so this kind of counterculture Christianity was fluid in the 60s and 70s, and it did unite in many cases with the civil rights movement, with the peace movement, with the women's movement. So many of the themes that we've discussed in this unit actually had this wild correlation in church. And so when I was first exposed to this topic years ago, because I guess I lived it, I brought up in it, but I never could kind of shake it. And when I decided to do a major research project to graduate from divinity school in Nashville, a theology school at Vanderbilt, I decided I wanted to do this this project on counterculture church as my main research project. And so I started to do some research on the Jesus hippies, and the Jesus hippies of the early 70s, you may not know that, got very much swept up into Billy Graham and what is considered to be evangelical Christianity. So today's very conservative, very conservative Christianity had its connection to these Jesus people of the 70s, and they would be very much for traditional gender roles. They would be very much interested in the country of Israel and its kind of integrity as a nation state. And so many of the things that conservative Christian groups today espouse were these Jesus hippies. And I was doing my research on it, and also contemporary Christian music and praise music comes out of this movement as well. And I said, but that's not what I remember. That wasn't the hippie churches that my parents took me to when I was a little kid. And so I started to do more research, and I realized that actually they were all together in the 60s, but there was kind of a fork in the road, and one group went left and one group went right. And so the progressive or the liberal or the hippie church had its liberal version that was united with all these groups, counterculture groups. Well, as I started to do this research, I wanted to get some firsthand evidence. I didn't want to just do secondary sources, books and articles. I wanted to do a primary source. And so I ended up finding these people, and I've projected them onto the slide today. And these are my friends, Calvin and Nelia, and they're Tennessee Tech University graduates, and they did 2 degrees here at Tennessee Tech. They majored in history, both for a bachelor's degree and for a master's degree. And they were part of the Wesley Foundation on 9th Street there, just off of campus by the Collegeside Church of Christ, over there behind Spanky's and the Smokestack building. And it's still a very interesting and very kind of hip college ministry. But Nelia and Calvin are retired United Methodist pastors now living in Atlanta, Georgia. They worked in the Catholic worker movement through a Protestant Catholic worker house in Atlanta called the Open Door Community, which is now no longer in existence. They've retired to Nashville, but they were musicians and artists, and they were full-blown hippie beatnik, Christian hippie beatniks from Cookeville. I mean, Calvin grew up in Nashville. Nelia hailed from south of Nashville. They spent many years in Indiana as young adults, but they were really brilliant theologians and artists and pastors. And so I was able to kind of unite with them and do this scholarly work. And I wrote a book. I called a book. I wrote a manuscript anyway called Banjo and Bread, based on my interviews with them. But then clearly that connection between Christianity and counterculture and beats was fully realized in that project that I was working on at that time. And so Kerouac is the one that, in all of his experiments with all these other things, alcoholism, promiscuity, driving a car 80 miles an hour, and Buddhist teaching and Buddhist meditation, never lost sight of Jesus. And it's a really amazing part of American history to see how these themes, imagine them like drawing lines on a piece of paper, and you start out with these straight lines, and they increasingly get more crooked, and then they start to blend together, and it looks more like a root system underneath a tree. And so the tree of America, I'm just kind of roughing in some metaphors for you all now, but imagine the tree of America to have this very tangled root system that includes all this religious diversity. Is really an important theme to America, and it really influences poetry and art to a great extent. So I hope I've done a somewhat okay job introducing you to the intersection of Buddhism and Christianity as it relates to the beats. And if I were editing the Portable Beat Reader, they would have had a whole section where we brought in Thomas Merton, and we brought in Dorothy Day and Peter Maurin. We brought in Brother Antoninus, William Everson, and there's others too. And I'll leave this to you with today as I go. It was written as a prayer book by a hippie priest in California, part of the Free Church of Berkeley, and he wrote this. He said, "God is not dead. God is bread. The bread is rising. Bread means revolution. God means revolution. Murder is no revolution. Revolution is love. Win with love. The radical Jesus is winning. The world is coming to a beginning. The whole world is watching. Organize for a new world. Wash off your brother's blood. Burn out the mark of the beast. Join the freedom meal. Plant the People's Park. The asphalt church is marching. The guerrilla church is recruiting. The People's Church is striking. The submarine church is surfacing. The war is over. The war is over. The war is over. The liberated zone is at hand." From the Free Church of Berkeley by John Perriman Brown and Richard L. York of Berkeley, California. Late 60s, real stuff there that you probably never knew ever actually really happened in America. So I want to thank you all for learning about the intersection of Jesus and Buddha and the beat movement and the counterculture in American studies, American Lit today for our class. And we'll be back on Wednesday with more discussion of some of these writers. And so bring your questions about these topics on Wednesday. Thank you.